Hello and welcome back to RPG PhD. I'm Dr. Ben. Let me start with something that sounds obvious but isn't. Every tabletop role-playing game table develops a culture. Some tables are cautious and tactical. Some are loud and chaotic. Some rotate spotlight gracefully. Some revolve around whoever talks fastest. Some embrace failure as story fuel. Some treat failure as disaster. We tend to explain those differences in terms of personality. We say that group is competitive, or those players are shy, or this game master runs a tight ship. All of that matters. But here's the part we don't talk about enough. The system is shaping those outcomes. Mechanics influence who speaks. They influence who takes risks. They influence who leads. They influence how disagreement unfolds. They influence how safe it feels to fail. What I want to discuss today is this. When you design mechanics, you are in a sense designing table culture. And when you design table procedures, you are interacting with personality. We're going to look at both sides, how mechanics shape the social ecosystem of the table, and how those same mechanics amplify or dampen different personality traits. If you care about table culture or just better play, this is design territory that you cannot ignore. So let's get into it. When I say table culture, I mean the set of norms a group develops about how play works in practice. It includes who speaks most, how spotlight moves, how comfortable people feel interrupting, how conflict gets handled, how seriously the group treats the fiction, and what counts as good play. Some of this is explicit, like Session Zero agreements. A lot of it is implicit. It shows up in small, repeated habits. Who summarizes the plan? Who negotiates with NPCs? Who cracks jokes to release tension? Who tracks rules? Who takes the first risk? Who waits to be invited? Sociologist Gary Allen Fine talks about tabletop role-playing groups as small social worlds, with shared meanings and negotiated expectations, built through repeated interaction over time. Those norms do not arise in a vacuum, they emerge within structures. Incentives shape behavior, rules channel interaction. That idea matters because it frames table culture as something that is produced, not something that simply exists. Groups make it together, they reinforce it together. They also inherit it from the structures around them, including the game system. Here's the leap that I think designers need to take seriously. Mechanics and procedures help create those norms. You can think about this as an extrapolation from RAM-style thinking about tools shaping user behavior, yet it also aligns with a basic principle of game studies. Salen and Zimmerman define games through rules that structure play, and they emphasize what players experience emerges from the interaction between rules and player activity. In tabletop RPGs, that interaction is social all the way down. Rules do not sit on the page. Rules become habits. Habits become culture. So the design question is not only, does this mechanic resolve actions, it's also, what kind of table does this mechanic train people to become? If a system rewards the fastest speaker with more narrative impact, the table will drift toward fast talker culture. If the system uses strict turn structure and clear prompts, quieter players tend to get more protected space. If advancement rewards solving problems through violence, you will usually see a table culture that looks to violence as the default answer. If advancement rewards beliefs, bonds, and consequences, you will often see a table culture that treats character interiority as a core play loop. None of these outcomes are guaranteed. Personality and group norms still matter quite a bit. Still, the system is pushing in a certain direction. In other words, you can think of mechanics as social architecture. They distribute attention, they allocate authority, they decide how often players must coordinate. They decide what kind of risk is acceptable. They decide whether agreement becomes negotiation, arbitration, or procedure. Once you see that, table culture looks like one more aspect of design output. If table culture is the pattern of behavior that emerges over time, incentives are one of the strongest forces that shape that pattern. In plain terms, what the system rewards becomes what the table treats as valuable. This is certainly not a new idea in game design. It shows up in very direct ways in role-playing game history. Early Dungeons & Dragons famously tied advancement to treasure recovered, which encouraged exploration, logistics, and clever risk management. Later editions lean more heavily into combat XP, which nudged players toward a more encounter-centered cadence. I'm not saying either approach is good or bad by default. I'm saying the reward structure teaches the table what the game is about. When players repeatedly receive progress for certain behaviors, those behaviors become default. A reward system is one of the clearest examples of that structure producing meaning. It's a value statement encoded as procedure. So, if you want to design for a particular table culture, you start by looking at your incentives as cultural training wheels. Here are a few common patterns that show up all the time. If advancement comes from defeating enemies, the table will often treat problems as combat problems, even when the fiction offers alternatives. If advancement comes from discovering locations, collecting information, or mapping the world, the table tends to become more curious. If advancement comes from beliefs, bonds, or character goals, the table tends to become emotionally intentional. If advancement is primarily tied to surviving, conserving resources, and paying costs, the table tends to become cautious and plan-heavy. These are tendencies. A group can always resist them. Over many sessions, incentives still exert gravity. This is also where designers can unintentionally create social side effects. Individual rewards can encourage subtle competition. Shared rewards can encourage coordination. A system that grants spotlight currencies for bold declarations may train players to speak in big dramatic beats. A system that rewards careful planning may train players to debate longer and take fewer risks. A system that punishes failure harshly can train a culture of risk avoidance. A system that treats failure as complication can train a culture of experimentation. And this is why I like to say that a reward system is a social contract in mechanical form. It tells the table repeatedly what counts as progress. It tells the table what behaviors are worth investing in. And it tells the table what kind of player the game wants you to be. Here's a practical design exercise you can do right now. Take your system or your house rules and list the 3 things that most reliably lead to advancement, power, or narrative advantage. Those 3 items are your cultural engine. They're what your table will drift toward over time. If you love that drift, great. If you don't, you have a clear target for redesign. Spotlight often gets discussed as a table etiquette issue. People say things like share the spotlight or make room for others. That advice is true. It is also incomplete because spotlight is not only a social phenomenon. Spotlight is shaped by the structure of play. If your system has no procedures that allocate speaking time, spotlight tends to drift toward the people who speak quickly, speak confidently, or speak often. That's not a moral judgment, it is a predictable outcome of unstructured airtime. In practice, freeform scenes can unintentionally reward verbal speed, comfort with interruption, and a willingness to take conversational space. Some groups handle that well. Some groups quietly lose players in the margins. Systems with explicit turn structure distribute airtime differently. Initiative in combat is the obvious example, and it's not just a combat tool. It can also be a social tool. It guarantees each player a moment in the cycle where the table is listening to them. Outside of combat, many games do not provide an equivalent structure. They rely on organic conversation. Organic conversation can be wonderful. It can also magnify inequality in participation. Rules do not only determine what happens in the fiction, they determine who gets access to decision-making bandwidth. In tabletop role-playing games, that experience includes the experience of being heard. So the design question becomes, what procedures ensure that everyone has a fair chance to contribute? A strict turn cycle does one thing. It equalizes attention. It also imposes pacing constraints. A spotlight token economy does another thing. It creates an explicit resource for airtime. A move trigger system does another thing. It gives quieter players a structured way to enter play. When you do X, you roll Y. That reduces the social friction of jumping in. Even something as simple as a formal declaration phase, where each player states an intention before action resolves, changes who participates and when. You can also design spotlight through roles. If one player is the navigator, one is the quartermaster, one is the face, one tracks faction clocks, you have created legitimate reasons for different people to speak. Roles can become power hierarchies, so they need careful handling. Here's a grounded test you can run on your own design. Watch a session and track who speaks during 3 types of scenes: planning, crisis, and downtime. If the same person dominates all 3, you may have a structure problem, or maybe a dominant personality. If certain players become active only in combat, you may have designed combat as the only place where the game guarantees them a turn. If you want table culture to be inclusive and ensemble driven, you can support that culturally with norms. You can also support it mechanically with procedures that distribute airtime. Authority at the table is not just a personality trait, it is structured. In most traditional role-playing games, the game master holds significant authority. The game master describes the world, sets difficulties, adjudicates edge cases, and determines outcome for non-player characters. That distribution of power can work beautifully. It can also create tension depending on the personalities involved. The important point is that this authority structure is not accidental. It's embedded in the rules. When a system says the game master decides, it is codifying a hierarchy. When a system says on a 10 plus the player narrates the outcome, it is redistributing authority procedurally. When a system requires consensus for world building elements, it is flattening hierarchy in a very deliberate way. Sociologically, authority is often tied to legitimacy. Max Weber described different forms of authority: traditional, charismatic, and legal rational, each grounded in different sources of legitimacy. In tabletop role-playing games, rules function as a kind of legal rational authority. They legitimize decisions. If the book says this is how it works, that carries weight. This matters for personality because different players have different relationships to authority. Some are comfortable challenging the game master. Some defer automatically. Some thrive in systems with shared narrative control. Some prefer clear hierarchies. When authority is ambiguous, assertive personalities tend to fill the vacuum. When authority is proceduralized, quiet players often gain more footing. Consider the difference between these 2 approaches to social conflict. In one system, the player describes their speech and the game master describes how persuasive it was. In another, the player triggers a defined move with a clear outcome range tied to a role. In the first case, success is heavily mediated by the game master's interpretation. In the second, authority is shared between procedure and interpretation. Both can function well. They produce different table dynamics. Authority structures also shape conflict resolution at the social level. If disputes about rules require game master arbitration every time, the GM becomes the final judge. If the system provides explicit procedures for resolving ambiguity, that reduces interpersonal friction. Clear procedure can lower the temperature of disagreement. Designers sometimes focus on balance and probability curves while leaving authority distribution implicit. Yet authority is one of the strongest cultural signals a system sends. It determines who has the power to say, "This is what happens." So here's the design prompt. Ask yourself who can introduce new fictional elements without permission. Who can declare facts? Who can change stakes? Who can negate an outcome? Those answers help map your authority structure. That structure will interact with personality in both predictable and sometimes unpredictable ways. Risk is not only a probability question, it's an emotional climate. A system teaches players how safe it is to be bold, how costly it is to experiment, and what failure means socially at the table. Over time, that becomes a norm. People stop making individual decisions in a vacuum. They begin to follow the table's learned risk culture. This connects to a classic idea in game design. Uncertainty produces tension and meaning. Greg Costigan argues that uncertainty is central to games because it creates stakes and engagement. In tabletop RPGs, that uncertainty is filtered through group psychology. The same odds can feel exhilarating in one system and punishing in another, depending on what failure does. So the key design lever is not simply chance of success, it is consequence of failure. If failure means death, permanent loss, or severe punishment with little warning, most groups become conservative over time. They plan more, they avoid improvisation, they seek perfect information. That culture can be appropriate for survival horror or gritty warfare or that sort of game. It is a choice. It also changes who thrives at the table. Risk averse personalities feel validated. Risk seeking personalities may feel punished. Quieter players may retreat further because the cost of speaking up and trying something is high. If failure produces complications that keeps play moving, the emotional climate can shift. Players try strange ideas because the downside is narrative trouble, not catastrophic removal from play. Systems that build in partial success or fail-forward structures tend to teach a culture of experimentation. They encourage improvisational personalities. They also reduce the social fear of, quote, making the wrong move, because the system treats mistakes as fuel. And here's where personality becomes a design concern. Different players have different thresholds for uncertainty. Some love gambling with high stakes. Some experience that as stress. A system can accommodate that diversity with safety valves. Things like metacurrencies, retreat procedures, clear telegraphing of danger, and structured ways to reduce harm. Those design choices don't necessarily eliminate risk, they make risk legible and negotiable. Legibility matters. When players feel blindsided by consequences, they often interpret the experience socially. It becomes about fairness and trust. When risk is signaled clearly through visible clocks, explicit stakes, or transparent difficulty, players can consent to the danger. Consent changes the emotional texture of the risk. You can also design for risk through pacing. A game that forces rapid decisions under time pressure trains a different culture than a game that encourages long deliberation. Both can be exciting. Both shape who feels comfortable participating. Fast tempo systems tend to privilege quick thinkers and confident speakers. Slow tempo systems tend to privilege planners and analysts. Again, no moral judgment. It's a design output. So when you design risk mechanics, you're also designing an emotional layer of your table. You're telling players whether courage is rewarded, whether caution is required, and whether failure is shameful or generative. Tabletop RPGs are usually described as cooperative games. The party works together. The players collaborate against obstacles. That framing is broadly true. It can also hide subtler dynamics that emerge from mechanics. Cooperation and competition are not opposites. They exist on a spectrum shaped by incentives, rewards, and resource distribution. If advancement is tracked individually and rewards are allocated based on personal achievement, even a cooperative fiction can drift towards subtle competition. Players compare damage totals, narrative influence, or spotlight frequency. Over time, those comparisons become part of table culture. Some groups enjoy that energy. Others experience it as tension. Shared advancement systems can shift that dynamic. When the group levels together, earns resources together, and succeeds or fails together, cooperation becomes structurally reinforced. No one falls behind mechanically for choosing a support role or for setting up someone else's big moment. Elinor Ostrom's research on collective resource management shows that groups can sustainably manage shared goods when clear norms and mutual accountability structures exist. This principle translates well. Shared resources encourage collective problem solving when the structure supports it. In RPG terms, shared currencies, pooled resources, and team-based objectives can produce a similar effect. The underlying insight about shared incentives shaping cooperative behavior is well established. Mechanics also shape intra-party power hierarchies. Systems that reward finishing blows or damage output can center combat-focused characters. Systems that reward tactical coordination, such as bonuses for assisting, flanking, or combining abilities, encourage players to think about synergy. The math nudges behavior. Or consider loot distribution. If treasure is privately owned and exclusive, players negotiate division. That negotiation can be playful or tense, depending on personalities. If treasure converts into shared upgrades or communal benefits, the focus shifts toward group planning. There is also narrative competition. Some systems provide tokens that allow players to seize narrative control or interrupt scenes. When those tokens are scarce and individually held, players may time their use strategically in ways that feel competitive. The important thing here is awareness. Even in a game marketed as cooperative, mechanical structures can introduce competitive pressures, and those pressures may be mild. They may be energizing. They may also amplify certain personality traits like ambition, optimization, or dominance. If you want a table culture centered on ensemble storytelling, examine how rewards, resources, and spotlight tokens flow. If you want a more high energy competitive edge within cooperation, structure incentives accordingly. Design does not eliminate personality differences, it shapes how those differences interact. Up to this point, we've talked about culture mostly in structural terms: incentives, spotlight, authority, risk, and cooperation. Now we need to zoom in on personality, because mechanics do not interact with a generic player. They interact with individuals who bring temperament, communication style, risk tolerance, and social comfort to the table. Psychology gives us a useful framework here. The Big Five, the five-factor model of openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, or OCEAN, is among the most widely used and studied trait taxonomies in personality research. I'm not suggesting you need to design directly for these categories. I'm saying that people vary along dimensions like assertiveness, comfort with uncertainty, sensitivity to stress, and appetite for novelty. Mechanics will amplify or buffer those traits. Take extroversion. Highly unstructured scenes often reward verbal fluency and quick thinking. In a free-form negotiation with no turn prompts, players who are comfortable speaking at length tend to occupy more airtime. A structured move system with clear triggers and defined outcomes can support quieter personalities by lowering the barrier to entry. The rule becomes an invitation to speak. Consider conscientiousness and planning orientation. Systems that reward careful logistics, resource tracking, and tactical coordination often resonate with players who enjoy structure and foresight. Systems that emphasize improvisation, narrative currency, and reactive play may energize players who thrive on spontaneity. Neither approach is obviously universally superior. They cultivate different experiences. Risk tolerance is another axis. Some players experience high uncertainty as thrilling, and others experience it as stressful. A system with lethal consequences and little buffering can intensify anxiety for some personalities, while producing meaningful tension for others. Introducing visible stakes, graduated consequences, or recovery options does not eliminate danger, it just modulates its psychological impact. Agreeableness and conflict tolerance also matter. Ambiguous rules that require negotiation can energize players who enjoy debate. They can exhaust players who prefer clear procedures. A system with explicit resolution structures reduces interpersonal negotiation, which can create a calmer table climate. Here's the crucial design insight. Mechanics can either amplify dominant personalities or create space for diverse ones. If your system consistently rewards speed, confidence, and assertiveness over time, the table may skew toward those traits. If your system includes procedural rotation, explicit prompts, and shared authority tools, it creates scaffolding that supports a wider range of temperaments. This does not mean that designers must neutralize personality. That is neither possible nor desirable. It means being conscious of which traits your system tends to privilege. You can even think of this as personality filtering. Certain systems naturally attract certain kinds of players because the mechanics feel comfortable to them. That's not a flaw, it's a design signature. The key question is whether that signature aligns with your intentions. So now let's walk through a step-by-step guide for designing mechanics or house rules with table culture and personality in mind. So first, name the table culture you want. Write 3 to 5 adjectives that describe the play experience you're aiming for. So for example, bold, fast, cinematic; funny, cautious, tactical; lethal, gritty, character-driven; intimate, dramatic, reflective; mystery forward, investigative, tense, or paranoid. If you can't name it, your mechanics will end up naming it for you. Next, identify the behavior your rules reward. Culture begins with incentives. Every reward structure trains behavior. Over time, players internalize what the game treats as progress, success, and skillful play. So start by asking, what actions most reliably produce advancement? What earns XP, currency, narrative control, or power? What behaviors are repeatedly reinforced? What actions are ignored? Even small reward signals accumulate. You could also look at micro rewards. Does the system give bonuses for assisting? Does it reward clever plans? Does it reward dramatic speeches? Does it reward emotional vulnerability? Does it reward optimization? Each of these creates a cultural emphasis. A helpful exercise is to list the top 3 behaviors that reliably move characters forward. That list is your system's cultural engine. If you love that engine, strengthen it. If you see unintended drift, then adjust the reward loop. Next, map your spotlight structure. Spotlight is attention distributed over time. Many tables assume spotlight is purely social etiquette. In reality, it is partially mechanical. So ask, who is guaranteed a turn? In which phases of play is participation structured? In which phases is it freeform? Do certain character types automatically trigger more roles or more scenes? Structured spotlight, like initiative or turn-based action, tends to equalize participation. Freeform spotlight tends to favor confidence, speed, and verbal dominance. You can also design spotlight through roles. For example, the navigator, quartermaster, chronicler, diplomat, scout, etc. When roles carry mechanical weight, they can legitimize different kinds of contributions. Spotlight structure answers a fundamental question: who gets airtime and how predictably? If you want ensemble culture, build rotation into more than just combat. Next, map your authority structure. Authority defines who can declare what is true. Write down who has power over each of these. Setting stakes, introducing new fictional elements, calling for roles, determining difficulty, narrating outcomes, overriding results. Some systems centralize authority in the gamemaster. Some distribute it through player-facing moves. Some create hybrid structures with currencies that temporarily shift control. A quick diagnostic: if a player wants to introduce a new detail about the world, what must happen? Nothing. They can simply declare it. They must trigger a move. They must spend a token. They must ask the gamemaster. They cannot. That answer reveals your authority model. Authority is not just about narrative control, it's about legitimacy. It defines whose voice carries structural weight. Next, define your risk tone through consequences. Risk culture is built on consequences. The same probability can feel thrilling or oppressive depending on what failure does. Ask, what happens on a failure? Is the consequence immediate or delayed? Is it lethal, limiting, embarrassing, destabilizing, narrative, or logistical? Is risk visible before action? Can players mitigate danger? Harsh failure conditions encourage careful planning and long deliberation. Complication-based failure encourages experimentation. Accumulating pressure systems encourage strategic pacing. Highly telegraphed danger builds trust. Hidden danger can build paranoia. A useful exercise is to structure 3 failures in a row. What happens? Does play stall? Does it escalate? Does someone feel punished socially? Does the story deepen? If your goal is a culture of daring collaboration, design failure to generate forward motion. If your goal is survival horror tension, design failure to restrict and threaten. If your goal is political intrigue, design failure to complicate relationships and alliances. Risk tone is one of the most powerful cultural engines in your system. Next, decide how the system handles conflict at the table. When we talk about conflict in game design, we often mean fictional conflict, combat, social maneuvering, political tension. There is another kind of conflict that matters just as much: social friction at the table itself. Every system implicitly defines how rule disagreements, edge cases, and interpretation gaps are resolved. That process shapes table culture over time. Ask, when the rules are unclear, what happens next? Does the game master make a ruling on the spot? Does the table negotiate? Is there a written procedure that resolves ambiguity? Are rulings final, revisited later, or open to group revision? Next, audit cooperation versus competition signals. Even games that are explicitly cooperative can unintentionally encourage competitive behavior. Competition does not require PvP or player versus player mechanics. It can emerge quietly through how rewards, recognition, and resources are distributed. Start by examining how progress flows through your system. Ask, are rewards individual or shared? Is loot exclusive or does it benefit the group? Are there MVP-style mechanics that spotlight top performers? Do some roles consistently generate more advancement or narrative currency? Are support actions rewarded as visibly as headline actions? Next, add one buffer and one amplifier. This step makes your intentions explicit. A buffer protects against unwanted cultural drift. An amplifier strengthens the culture you want. For example, if fast speakers dominate social scenes, a buffer might be a formal declaration phase, a speak in turn prompt, a once per session token that guarantees narrative entry. If you want collaboration, an amplifier might be assist mechanics that generate shared bonuses, combo abilities that reward coordination, XP triggers for enabling others' success. If you want bold play, an amplifier might be mechanical benefits for acting under pressure, currency earned through dramatic risk. Keep these interventions small. Table culture doesn't just happen, it emerges from repeated patterns. And those patterns are heavily influenced by your rules. Personality doesn't disappear at the table. It gets amplified, buffered, or redirected by the structures you build. So the next time you write or tweak a mechanic, don't just ask, is this balanced? Ask, what kind of table does this create? If this episode got you thinking, I'd love to hear your perspective. What mechanics at your table most clearly shaped the culture? Have you ever seen a rule amplify a personality dynamic in a surprising or interesting way? Drop your thoughts in the comment section below. And if you found this helpful, please like the video, share it with someone who designs or runs games, and subscribe to RPG PhD if you haven't already. And as always, thanks for watching. See you next time.